All right, 6.4. So we're going to learn more about genes, how they're passed on as various traits. So genes encode proteins that produce a diverse range of traits. Basically, that's how you get the different traits you see in your body. You think about things like hair color, eye color, blood type. These are all controlled by genes. How do genes control those traits? Well, genes are DNA fragments that have instructions to make different proteins. By making different kinds of proteins, they give you different traits. So blood type A versus blood type B, how is that different? Well, they have different proteins on the blood cells that make them type A or type B or type O. Eye color, how does that happen? Different proteins give you different color pigments. You get blue or brown hazel eyes based on the pigments that you have. And that's due to the proteins that are produced from your DNA. So pretty much everything you can think of as far as traits go that we get from our genes is from different proteins being made to produce those traits. And for homework yesterday, 6.3, just make sure you have it out if you haven't turned it in yet, just ready to take up after this. Does everybody have this down? Okay. The same genes can have many different versions. And again, what that means is that you can have a gene for blood type, but you can have a blood type A or blood type B or O. Or you can have a gene for hair color and have blonde hair or red hair or black hair or brown hair. So a gene is a piece of DNA that directs a cell to make a certain protein. Each gene has a locus. In Latin, locus means place. It's a certain position on a pair of homologous chromosomes. And on the chromosome, you have many different genes. You can have hundreds or thousands of genes on a chromosome. But in a certain place on that chromosome, you have different genes that code for different proteins. So if you're looking at, this example, you can see that you have a purple chromosome and a green chromosome. That's for a pea plant. And within that chromosome, you can see on the same place on both homologous chromosomes, it codes for texture of that pea. So it can code for wrinkled peas or smooth peas. In this case, they both code for wrinkled peas. Let me go back for a second, just make sure you got that down. So remember what homologous chromosomes are. They're chromosomes that code for the same kinds of genes, but they can code for different variations of those genes. As I mentioned before, you can have, for peas, you can have wrinkled peas or smooth peas. Those are two variations of that trait. So if they're homozygous, it means the same exact genes. So you might have saw, I think, homework last night, they talked about homozygous versus heterozygous. Homozygous are the same exact genes, in this case, both wrinkled. You can have heterozygous, which in this case, it would be one wrinkled gene and one smooth gene. So that's what homozygous versus heterozygous means. Does everybody have this one down? So for every trait you can think about, we have two genes for every trait. So, if you have blonde hair, well, you would have two genes that give you the blonde hair trait. Now, if you have brown hair, though, it could be a little bit different. For brown hair, you could have a gene for brown hair and a gene for blonde hair, but only show the gene for brown hair.
What happens if both your parents have brown hair?
Then it's possible. I mean, it depends on the family, but parents can carry the gene for blonde hair and pass to their children, and their kids can have blonde hair while the parents have brown hair. So that can happen. That's fairly common, where the parents can carry genes like blonde hair, but not express it themselves, but their kids then express that gene.
So like, what if like you have blonde hair when you're young and then as you grow older it gets darker?
Yeah, so genes can turn off or turn on over time. And so it's very common as you get older to have certain genes change. And so that can be due to growing up, it can be due to changing your environment, it can be due to hormone changes like during pregnancy. Many times hair color changes during after birth. And also when a baby is growing, you can also see as they develop, their hair also changes as they get older. And that's just due to the genes over time, either turning off or turning on. And so that's usually what's happening there. Now, you can also have the environment changing your hair. So if you get more sun, your hair can be lighter based on how much sun you get. If you're in the pool a lot, the chlorine can change your hair color, make it look like a greenish or a blonde tint to it. So there are a lot of different things that can do that, but those are some reasons why you might have a change in hair color as you get older. Hair texture can change. You can go from curly hair to straight hair. That's possible too, that can change over time. And that's just due to your genes changing. An allele is any alternative form of a gene occurring at a certain locus on a chromosome. So an allele basically is another word for a gene. An allele is a certain kind of gene for a certain kind of trait. So you have alleles for hair color, for example. And within that, you can have an allele for blonde hair, an allele for brown hair, an allele for red hair. So it's basically variances of a certain gene. Each parent gives one allele for every gene. And on this slide, also write down what you see on the right-hand side, what homozygous means and what heterozygous means. It can help you to draw the pictures too. I won't make you draw those pictures, but it certainly can help if you do. But just draw the definitions of homozygous and heterozygous, as well as the other bullet points on the slide. So I mentioned this earlier, but we'll go through it again. Homozygous versus heterozygous. Homozygous alleles are identical to each other. So you can see in the diagram, example would be both having the gene for wrinkled peas. So homozygous alleles have the same exact genes. Heterozygous alleles are different from each other. So for heterozygous, it would be one gene for wrinkled peas, one gene for smooth round peas. So they always refer, if you're talking about heterozygous or homozygous, they always refer to the same kinds of genes. In this case, texture of peas. So if we talk about this, we're talking about within a certain allele, within a certain gene, the variances of those. Don't worry about those, you already wrote those down. Okay. Generally, so again, we mentioned we have 2 genes for every trait. Usually one gene is dominant over the other gene. We usually don't express both genes. We usually express one or the other. And so again, if you have a gene for blue eyes, a gene for brown eyes, you will only express one of those 2 genes. Generally, you'll express brown eyes. Yes.
What if a person has one blue eye and one brown?
That can happen. It's pretty rare. But that usually is, it's called a chimera when that happens. And basically you have different body cells, different DNA in different parts of the body. And that's generally due, not always, but generally due to having a twin who is a fraternal twin in the womb who died, and then their DNA absorbed into your body. And you now have a mixture of your twin's DNA who died along with your own DNA in different parts of the body. So that's one thing that can happen. You can also have a mutation happen very early on in your formation. And if that happens, you can have a mixture of mutated cells and non-mutated cells throughout your body. in different organs and different parts of the body. And so you could have one gene that's mutated for blue eyes, one gene that's not for brown eyes. You could have different blotches of skin where you could have a gene for dark skin, one gene for light skin. Those are some things that could happen. So it's not very common, but it definitely does happen where you do see that. And that's really due to a mutation in the DNA when you're very, very young, or a twin who has not survived childbirth and you absorb their DNA into your body. So this happens very often at all. It's very, very rare, but those are things that might explain why you see that happen. Does everybody have this down? Those 2 bullet points in the homozygous, heterozygous? Genes influence the development of traits. So most of the things you can think about that make you you are based on genes. Now, of course, there's more than just genes that make you who you are, but genes are a big part of it. So you also have your environment that shapes you, the choices you make, the foods you eat, the friends you have, how you are raised. These things all also impact who you are, along with your spiritual life. You have a soul, and the soul is not material. And that also will affect who you are. Identical twins have the same exact DNA, but they're not the same person. They have different personalities. They have different likes and dislikes. They look a little bit different from each other. And so DNA does not tell the full story. There's more than just DNA that makes us who we are. The DNA definitely has a lot to do with it. So this picture shows you all the genes that we have discovered in the human body. It shows you where they are on each chromosome location. They're numbered 1 through 22, along with chromosome X and Y. They don't show Y in here, but we also would have Y as well on the chromosome. And that's called the human genome, where we've mapped all the genes that we know about. Now, there's many others that might exist that we don't know about just yet. So there's a lot we have not looked into yet in the human genome. We know about 30,000 genes that exist, but there are many more to be discovered, probably millions more that we don't know about that exist in the human body.
How is it graphed, like what things?
Oh, basically it's how much genes we know about. So chromosomes, as you get higher in number, they're usually smaller in size. So basically it's just, but within the chromosome itself, there's a lot of a space that's not used for anything that we know about. So this just shows you the amount of genes that we know about within every chromosome. That's due to the length of the chromosome and also how much you know about the chromosome. So like chromosome number 4 is longer than 5, but we know less about it. Or there's less genes on number 4 that actually do something for the body. So every color band means a different gene. The longer the band, the longer the gene that we see in that chromosome. Does that make sense? So when you like have it, you know, like 23andMe DNA test, and they give you a readout of your genes, they don't look at all your genes. They can't. There's way too many genes. They can't give you all 30,000 known genes. They look at maybe 100 to 200 different genes, but it's still quite a lot. But they can't look at everything. That's just too expensive and too time consuming. So they look at just specific genes that would be of interest to you. But all the genes in your body, I mean, you can definitely get that done, but it'd be very expensive and take a long time to do because we have so many genes within our body. A genotype, the bottom one below the picture, a genotype refers to the makeup of a specific set of genes. So a symbol for the kinds of genes in your body is a genotype. So you might, for example, have 2 genes for blue eyes. Usually we indicate that with 2 lowercase b's. So if we're writing out the genes we have for eye color, we might write 2 lowercase b's to indicate that we have 2 genes for blue eyes. If we have the gene for brown eyes, we might have uppercase B. So we have a gene for brown eyes and a gene for blue eyes. We would write 1 uppercase B for brown, 1 lowercase b for blue. That's genotype. It's a symbol for the genes we have for a certain trait. Then a phenotype would be the expression of that trait. It's what we can see or observe. So the phenotype would be the actual eye color that we can see on the person, whether they're brown or blue. So we can see genes for ethnicity. We can, if you have the 23andMe test, it lets you know what countries you originated from, Germany, Sweden, Russia, etc. It tells you your ancestry. So, within a certain person, let's say that one of your parents is fully German, the other parent is fully Korean, and you were to assume then you would have 50% German, 50% Korean, right? That's not actually what happens lots of times. You might be 40% German, 60% Korean. The genes don't always mix evenly. And so you can look in your report and see the actual percentage of ethnicity you'd have. And it might not be exactly what you would imagine, because genes that you get can differ slightly from person to person in the family. So I mentioned this earlier, alleles can be represented by using letters. We can say the genes that we have based on one letter abbreviation. There are dominant alleles, and a dominant allele is one that you will always express if you have it in your genes. So I mentioned before, if you have the gene for brown eyes, the gene for blue eyes, you will have brown eyes. The gene for brown eyes is always expressed, it's dominant. Yes.
Is that why more people have brown eyes than blue eyes?
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so it's easier to have a dominant trait be prevalent in the population. Not always, though. We can definitely have ones that are not dominant prevalent. It's just not as easy to do. And so usually the ones that are dominant are the ones that we see most common in the population. And so that would be darker skin color, darker hair color, darker eye colors are all dominant over lighter colors. Genes for blonde hair, red hair, we think that they were mutations that happen. Actually, we know red hair is a mutation, blonde hair is a mutation. So at one time, humans only had brown hair and brown eyes. But then one time, a mutation happened where somebody was born with blue eyes. And then that started to be more common in the population after that. Same thing with hair color. Skin color probably is the same way. We had two parents, Adam and Eve were their original parents. They only had one skin color, one hair color. But over time, as the people in the world started to populate, there were mutations that happened, which would include things like different skin colors, different hair colors.
Would there be different eye colors over time?
Exactly. So Adam and Eve started with one eye color, but over time we got things like blue eyes, green eyes.
So like from now, like
Oh, in the future?
Yeah.
Possibly. Now it's not as likely, but you could have like purple eyes, might, that could be something that could happen over time. It's been rumored to Elizabeth Taylor possibly had it. I hear different things about that. I don't know for sure, but apparently she had it. She was an actress. So people were rumored to have it, purple eyes, and I would imagine like red and blue give you purple, right? And so it'd be probably a mixture of the blood vessels mixing with the blue pigment to give you a purple. So it wouldn't be a true purple pigment. It would just be more of you have blue eyes with some red blood vessels that are close to the blue to make it look like it's purple. So true purple pigment I don't think is possible with humans, but maybe someday it could be possible with a mutation. So certainly we could have new hair colors, new skin colors, new eye colors as mutations. That's all possible. And genes can die out too. Some scientists are saying blonde hairs will die out in the future. Now, whether that's true or not, some scientists say, no, it's not going to happen, others say it will. But genes can certainly be lost too in populations over time. Blonde hair is very rare in the world. Red hair is even rarer. Blue eyes is very rare.
Oh, my cousins, their whole family has red hair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that happens when you have two parents with red hair, all their kids will have red hair. So if you have the redhead gene, all you have is genes for red hair. You don't have anything else besides the red hair gene. And so all your kids will also have red hair if both parents have red hair. A recessive trait is one that is expressed only when you have two copies of the same gene. So red hair is recessive. You have to have two red hair genes to have red hair. If both parents have red hair, all their kids have to have red hair, unless there's a mutation with the kids, because that's all they can give their kids is the gene for red hair. Dominant genes are uppercase letters. Recessive genes are lowercase ones. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back for a second. So as I mentioned before, you would write the gene for brown hair as uppercase B because brown hair is dominant. The gene for blonde hair is recessive, so you have lowercase b for blonde hair. No, there's a chat. Let me see this really fast. I can't see it with the full screen. Lucy had a question a while back between the top graph and the bottom. Let me see. Was it this one, Lucy, you're asking about? Okay. So you're talking about the difference between this bottom one right here and this top one. Actually, I'm not sure now that I'm looking at it. I don't know what the bottom one represent. The top one I know represents the kinds of genes that we know about in every chromosome. The bottom one, I don't know actually what that means. To me, it doesn't make sense to me what the bottom one represents. I wouldn't worry about that.
Why are they different colors?
Yeah, the different colors just mean different kinds of genes within the chromosome. So it's just showing you how the length of the chromosomes and the length of the genes within the chromosome. Yeah, I have no idea what the bottom one would represent. I couldn't tell you. I just know the top one represents the kinds of genes we have within the genome. Let's see. So we've gone through all those. Just this last slide. Oh, this one right here. So Mendel looked at pea plants because they're easy to observe. They have observable traits and they're tied to one gene. Humans is a lot more complex. You know, and I've been making things pretty simple. I'm just talking about like, you know, one gene for hair color, one gene for eye color. That's actually not really true. We actually have a few genes that control eye color and hair color. So even things like eye color and hair color, which seem to be simple, are not controlled just by one gene. So usually it happens. Now, red hair would be an exception. Red hair is controlled by one gene. That it's a mutation that happened at one time that made red hair. But the other ones, blonde hair, brown hair, those are all controlled by several genes. Same thing with eye color. That's made by 3 different genes. So with humans, there usually is not just one gene that controls one trait. We usually have several genes working together to make you have a combination of traits. So it's hard to talk about human genes because it just gets so complex. But with pea plants, it's very simple. And that's why we deal with pea plants in this class too, because they have 7 traits that are tied to just one gene each.
I don't know, but like, did like the Vikings, did they all like have red hair?
They might have. I mean, I think some of them did, from what I understand.
Like, did they not really happen? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they live in a place where that's really where red hair came from. And you know, there are people, yeah, Vikings, some Vikings were said to have it. I think even some kings were said to have had red hair.
Is it because of like the weather or something?
I don't think that had anything to do with it. I don't think having, you know, a mutation would have anything to do with the weather. I think it's just how it happened. It just, one mutation happened in that country. And then from there, other people had that inherited from their parents. And it just spread from that point. But yeah, it came from Ireland and in that area. That's where red hair originated from, around those islands up there. And that's where we find red hair still to this day, that most people who are redheaded come from that area. And it's just that one mutation happened in that place. It definitely, though, red hair also comes with other things besides just the hair color. It comes with pale skin usually, and it comes with freckles. And so those two things you don't really do well in hot environments or places that have a lot of sun. And so people who are redheaded, they would not have done so well if they came from, a place like Africa or India, because they don't have much pigmentation and they're going to be burned a lot faster in that place. So you would find redhead people, who survived to be up north. Like we see Ireland is very far north. It doesn't get a lot of sun up there. Okay, the last one to do. Both homozygous dominant and heterozygous genotypes give you a dominant phenotype. And so that means homozygous dominant would mean you have two dominant traits, like you have two genes for brown hair or two genes for brown eyes. Heterozygous would be you have different genes, but it's heterozygous dominant. You have a dominant and recessive trait. So you might have a gene for brown hair and a gene for blonde hair, but you still would only have brown hair show up as your phenotype. So if your genotype is brown hair, blonde hair, your phenotype would be only brown hair. So that's what they mean by that first bullet point. A dominant phenotype, that means you would only express the dominant gene. But as I mentioned before, most traits that we see do not follow a simple dominant recessive pattern. And that means that we usually don't just have one gene that controls that trait. And so it gets very complicated, very tricky to talk about, especially with humans, to talk about, genes and what control different traits. Because there's so many things we don't even know about. There are certain genes that we suspect might exist that we don't even know if they do or not at this point. We're learning a lot more about genes. Yes.
Can you have a trait of brown hair that goes in the blonde hair?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Your hair color can definitely change over time due to a lot of different things. Your genes can turn off or turn on, and that can cause different hair colors to form. Okay, well, that's it for this section. There's a few things I want to do today. So I want to give you homework to work on 6.4. I also want to give you a worksheet that goes through different genotypes and phenotypes within a human person. So let's do that today. Let me give you the worksheet to start with today. And this is about you and your classmates and different genes that we can see that are dominant recessive. So I want you to read through the packet, write down for yourself what you see. After you've done that, we're going to take a poll of the class and we'll see as a class what you all have. So just take one of these packets and pass it on, and then we'll go through this together. Turn the lights back on. So this packet gives you a few genes that might be controlled only by one gene. So these ones we think might just only have one gene that control them. All right, so do we have a packet? I just pass it on, okay.